Friendship can be a beautiful, lifelong connection when made with the right people. The saying, "Who needs friends when you have enemies?" is especially true for others. Today, I'll discuss the tragic tale of the girl who was burned alive by her friends. Yes, you heard right, friends. This is the horrific case of Adriana Zimmerman. The genesis of the crime. Adriana Zimmerman was a 19-year-old white teen mom who lived in a mobile park in Escambia County, Florida, with her two kids, 3-year-old David and 2-year-old Trinity. She was neighbors with Miss Tina Lasagna Brown, 40, and her 16-year-old daughter Brittany Miller and Heather Lee. At some point, they were said to be friends until things went sour between them, especially with Adriana, Tina Brown, and her daughter. It was reported that things used to get so heated between the trio, resulting in fights. At some point, Brown had accused Adriana of slashing her tires, and Adriana had also accused Tina Brown of shattering her car's window. Adriana also accused Brown of getting her boyfriend arrested and reporting her to the Florida Department of Children and Families, saying she provided inadequate care for her children. On the surface level, these fights appeared to be altercations between women irritated with each other. Little did anyone know that this would unlock a cruel, twisted hatred in Tina Brown and her daughter Brittany, till it would result in murder. Things would get ugly in March 2010 when the 16-year-old Brittany discovered that Adriana was sexually involved with her boyfriend. Perhaps out of anger, she had attempted to hit Zimmerman, who, in defense, tried to use a stun gun on her. Heather Lee, who was at the scene, had been the one to report the altercation to Tina Brown, telling her that Adriana had used a stun gun on Brittany. Brown responded that she was going to get Zimmerman. In a testimony by Corey Doyle, an inmate in the same cell as Tina Brown at the Escambia County Jail, she said that Brown had told her daughter, "Don't worry, I'll take care of it." With the back and forth between the trio, one would have expected that her retaliation would be in the form of the usual fights. However, Tina Brown had a rather sinister form of revenge in mind. Night of the murder. On March 24, 2010, Adriana Zimmerman received a peace offering from Tina Brown, inviting her to her home to extend an olive branch, which Adriana would accept. Before Adriana came over to her trailer, Brown had been together with her daughter Brittany, Brittany's 13-year-old friend Mallory Azriel, and Heather Lee. Heather and Brown were reported to be in the kitchen, where Heather guided Tina Brown on how to properly use a stun gun. Miller then took her friend Mallory aside and told her that they were fixing to kill Adriana. At about 9 p.m., Adriana Zimmerman arrived at the trailer and got in. After waiting for some minutes, Tina Brown attacked the unsuspecting Adriana with the stun gun until she lost muscular control. She would continue to use the stun gun on the helpless Adriana, who was screaming for help. As if that was not enough, Brown dragged the screaming Adriana across the trailer into her bathroom, where Heather Lee would stuff her mouth with a sock and Miller would hit her in the face. She would then be forced outside the trailer and loaded into the trunk of Tina Brown's car. The conniving trio, Brown, Brittany, and Heather, entered the car and drove off to a clearing in the woods, just a mile and a half from the trailer park where they resided. According to Lee, Tina Brown got down from the car and dragged the helpless Zimmerman out of her trunk. Adriana, perhaps now sure of what was to come, attempted to escape the women, but luck didn't seem to be on her side as she stumbled in the dark and was eventually caught by Brown and her daughter. Perhaps enraged at the fact that Adriana had tried to escape, both women wrestled her to the ground and started to attack simultaneously. Brown used the same stun gun on Adriana, while Brittany continuously hit her with a crowbar. At some point, the women switched weapons and tortured the powerless Adriana. Brittany even dropped the stun gun and repeatedly punched Adriana with her fist, while her mom returned to her car and retrieved a gasoline can. What happened next was totally horrific. The burning of Adriana Zimmerman. Tina Brown would douse Zimmerman, who was heavily bruised but still conscious, with gasoline, retrieve a lighter from her pocket, and set the poor teen on fire. Both mother and child would stand nearby, watching Zimmerman scream with pain as she burned. In a testimony by Heather Lee, she had been standing close to Brittany, who seemed overly ecstatic watching Adriana. Lee even said that the 16-year-old had been jumping up and down, screaming, "Burn, bitch! Burn," while other parents bonded over innocent fun. Tina Brown and her 16-year-old daughter, Brittany Miller, seemed to bond over the death of a fellow human. Eventually, the trio would leave Zimmerman and drive back home. On the way, Brittany suddenly asked her mom to turn around. "Mom, you've got to turn around. I left my shoes in the taser." Tina Brown, however, seemed determined not to return to the scene of the crime she committed. Back at the trailer, the monstrous trio would discard their bloody clothes and Lee's blood-stained shoes and put them in a garbage bag to discard. yard. Brittany would also attempt to clean the bloodstains from her mom and discard the garbage bag filled with their bloodstained clothes. Brittany would then tell her 13-year-old friend, Mallory, who was still at the trailer at the time of the attack, that she had hurt her hand while viciously attacking Zimmerman. Almost like she was proud of her deed, she also told the younger girl that they had set Zimmerman on fire. As a 13-year-old girl, I can only imagine the fear the young girl must have felt upon hearing the news. Still, both girls would take Tina's car and drive to where Miller's injured hand was treated. With what could only be described as the sheer will to live, Adriana, who had been left for dead, found the strength to pull herself up and walked a third of a mile from where she was attacked, asking for help. Whatever it was clear Adriana was somewhat determined to live. The monstrous trio are identified. Terrence Hendrick, who lived not far from the crime scene, was outside his house when he heard a faint voice asking for help. The voice belonged to a female, but he couldn't see anyone in the dark. Still, he hesitated till he saw a figure walking slowly toward his home. The faint voice belonged to Adriana Zimmerman, who approached him and asked for assistance. According to Terrence Hendrick's testimony, he said Adriana had been badly burnt to black, that he couldn't identify her race, and she had appeared like she was not wearing clothes. She also suffered from terrible head trauma, but somehow she managed to stay alive. While some part of me seemed glad that she survived, it was also hard and heartbreaking to fathom the pain she must have gone through, being that she was alive all through the ordeal. Adriana remained on the front porch with Terrence, rocking back and forth with her arms straight out when an EMT, identified as Fire Chief Hercules Kennard, arrived at about 9:24 p.m. Just like Terrence, the EMT also testified that Zimmerman was so severely burnt that it was initially hard to know if she had any clothing. The gut-wrenching part was that her skin had melted off and over 90% of her body was burned. He said that she had severe head trauma and her jaw had also been badly dislocated. The EMT explained that he would have typically put Zimmerman on oxygen, but her burns were so severe that they prevented him from giving her further medical assistance. He also stated that he had tried placing sterile gauze over her burns, but hers was so extensive that there wasn't enough to cover all of them. The EMT also stated that he had tried to stabilize her neck, but her skin was charred and rubbed off his gloves. Despite all of these, Adriana Zimmerman was conscious of what was happening. She even told the EMT that Tina Brown, Brittany Miller, and Heather Lee were the people who attacked her, telling him that they had dragged her out of the house, tased her, beaten her in the head with a crowbar, and then set her on fire. The monstrous trio's denials. In what could only be considered a sweet motherly love, Adriana Zimmerman would also give the EMT her address and ask him to protect her kids. She also gave out the addresses of her attackers before she was placed in an ambulance that arrived at Terrence's house. According to reports, she kept mentioning that Brown, Lee, and Brittany poured gasoline on her and set her on fire. She also repeatedly asked the paramedic Susie Davis if she would recover, but from the picture painted already, even I can tell this was wishful thinking. Adriana was also said to have stated that she thought they had made up. She was first stabilized at the Sacred Heart Hospital before being transferred to the Burn Center at the University of South Alabama Hospital in Mobile, Alabama. Here, she was placed in a medically induced coma. Based on the information provided by Adriana, the authorities immediately arrested Tina Brown and Heather Lee at Lee's trailer while Brittany was still at the hospital. The following day, Brittany joined them as she was arrested after she returned from the hospital. Following due process, they were questioned separately. According to testimony by Deputy Tyree, Tina Brown claimed that everyone in the trailer park fought, and she and Adriana were sometimes on good terms and sometimes not. She also stated that she and Adriana had made up that day and spent the rest of the day watching movies. Heather Lee, on the other hand, said she had been home all night cooking. However, Mallory Azriel testified against all three, recounting the incident inside the trailer before they took Adriana away. She said that Brittany had informed her that they were fixing to kill Adriana. She added that Brittany told her, "Don't tell anyone, or we will kill you too." I would have thought that this close encounter with the police would get Tina Brown fidgety and nervous, but she seemed unfazed. Death of Adriana Zimmerman. Brown went ahead to contact an old friend of hers, whose name was Pamela Valley. The duo had first met in 1997 in Wisconsin. However, Pamela would move to Pensacola, and Tina would later do so in the summer. She would go ahead and confess to Pamela that she, Brittany, and Lee had tased Adriana, forced her into the trunk of her car, Brown's, taken her to an open field, and lit her on fire without looking back. Again, I'm confused about why she admitted this to her friend. Was she reliving the events because she felt guilty or proud? Well, she answered this question when she called Pamela a few days later, saying that she had found that Adriana Zimmerman was alive and requested that Pamela finish her off. She also asked that Pamela and her daughter take a lie detector test on behalf of her and her daughter. On the other hand, Brittany would also send threatening text messages to Pamela's daughter. Thankfully, Pamela didn't share their friend's taste for crime and declined her request. She would also report the conversation to the police, who rearrested the trio on April 9, 2010. Unfortunately, that would be the same day Adriana Zimmerman died, still in her medically induced coma. 16 days after the trio had brutally attacked her, following the arrest of the culprits, the police would begin an intense investigation from the scene of the burning right down to Tina Brown's apartment. At the clearing where Adriana Zimmerman was burnt, the police discovered a number of pieces of evidence that corroborated the fact that the three women had been responsible for the heinous act. They found a pair of white shoes, a tissue paper stained with blood, a multicolored hair weave, a crowbar, a Talon stun gun with blood on the handle, a skirt, and a pool of blood. Further investigation would unearth blood found on the passenger seat headrest in Brown's car. Arrest and trial of the trio. There was an overwhelming amount of evidence that pointed to Tina Brown and her daughter, Brittany. Blood on the handle of the stun gun matched the DNA profile of Tina Brown, and the blood from the passenger headrest of Tina's red Hyundai SUV and both ends of the discovered crowbar matched Zimmerman's DNA. The white shoes found at the crime scene matched Brittany's DNA profile. Tina had also been missing a large chunk of hair at the back section, matching the hair weave found at the crime scene. After all three women had been arrested, Heather Lee testified, saying that she didn't fully participate in Zimmerman's murder. She said while Tina Brown was tasing Adriana, she had repeatedly told them to stop, but Mallory and Brittany grabbed her to prevent her from helping Adriana. She also stated that she had been forced into Brown's car and made to follow them to the clearing. Heather said that while they had been there, she had yelled at mother and daughter to stop hitting Adriana. In her words, she had yelled, "Stop, let us go, and we won't say anything," to which Tina responded, saying, "I can't let her go because I'll go to jail, but I'll let you go." She said that when they had gotten home, they had gotten rid of their blood-stained clothes, and Tina decided she would stay with her so she wouldn't say anything. Heather agreed that she had lied when they were first taken to the sheriff's office because she was scared. She further denied stuffing a sock in Adriana's mouth, nor did she teach Tina how to use a stun gun properly. An inmate, Corey Doyle, at the Escambia County Jail, housed with Tina Brown, also seemed to corroborate Heather's testimony. She said that she had asked Brown why she was wearing a lime green jumpsuit instead of the usual dark green, and Brown said she was wearing that because she, her daughter, and Heather had killed a girl. According to Corey, Tina Brown said that Heather was there but had nothing to do with it. At some point, Corey Doyle would be housed with Heather and told her what Tina had said, and Heather had told her to talk to her attorney, which she did. Brown's family testify in court. On the other hand, Eugene Hart, MD, had carried out an autopsy of Adriana Zimmerman. The results showed a laceration on her right parietal scalp and 2 bruises on the right parietal and temporal regions. She also had burns on her scalp, upper back, torso, and lower extremities. It was revealed that the cause of her death was multiple thermal injuries. On June 12, 2012, a jury convicted Tina Brown of the first-degree murder of Adriana Zimmerman. At the penalty phase, 6 family members testified on her behalf. They would tell the court about Tina Brown's tragic childhood. According to Gerald Coleman, Tina Brown's uncle, she was brought up by 2 teenage parents, Willie and Lillian, who married very young. Although he described them as hard workers, he mentioned that they liked to party and often spent the weekends at nightclubs consuming alcohol and drugs. Because of these, their kids Tina and her young brother, Willie Jr., were often passed around from relative to relative every weekend. Sometimes, young Tina, about 6 or 7 at the time, would be left alone to fend for herself and her brother. She was forced to take on a motherly role at a time when she needed a mother's guidance in her life. Shortly before her 12th birthday, Brown's parents would get a divorce after her father had hit her mother, and Willie Sr. Brown's father was handed custody of both kids after his ex-wife was charged with abandonment. Along the line, Willie Sr. would marry Melinda, a known prostitute and heavy drug user. According to Gerald, getting married to Melanie took Willie Sr. several steps back as he started using drugs in the home, which he didn't used to do. He also used his home as a front where drugs were sold constantly. Tina's dad and stepmom got into fights often, and this violence was significantly worse when they were both high on drugs. A glimpse into the life of Tina Lasagna Brown. The family reportedly moved 4 times, always moving to projects around North Carolina, known for their violence and gang activities. As she got older, all Tina and her young brother knew was alcohol, drugs, and violence inside and outside her home. Her uncles also believed that Melinda got Tina started on drugs and prostitution. Willie Jr. was also drawn into this tragic circle, as he was already involved with gangs and even got a gang tattoo at 8 years old. Willie claimed he smoked his first cigarettes at the age of 7, and it was given to him by Melinda. Another of Brown's uncles, J.C. Coleman, also testified that he suspected that Tina was being sexually abused by her father. She said one time she had walked over to his place and told him that she and her father had got into it, and when asked what she meant, she refused to say. She said that Tina had always seemed uncomfortable with her dad. He talked and treated her like a boyfriend would treat his girlfriend, not in a fatherly manner. When Tina attempted to discuss this abuse with her grandmother, she got upset, and it led to a physical altercation, to which her grandmother sent her out of the house and told her never to return. J.C. Coleman had to call Lillian and tell her to come to get her daughter because he didn't want to send her back to his brother. By the time Tina and her brother moved to her mom's house, she was already out of control due to drug use. She had trouble adjusting to her mom's structured living environment, and Lillian ordered her to leave because she couldn't deal with the rules. Tina went on to stay with her aunt and attended 4 different high schools in 4 years. The cycle of repeat trauma continues. At some point, she dropped out, but eventually continued and got a high school diploma. Since she was already far gone, Tina Brown moved into a drug house where she met Greg Miller, who would turn out to be the father of her 3 children, Greg Jr., Deontay, and Brittany Miller. Tina and Greg heavily abused drugs when they were in the drug house. It was so bad that her first child, Greg Jr., was born cocaine positive. It wasn't long before she got pregnant with her second child. At this time, she was being physically abused by Greg Sr., and when she got pregnant with her third child, she moved out of the drug house and ended her relationship with the father of her kids. She entered a substance abuse treatment facility for rehabilitation, where Brittany was born. While at the treatment facility, Tina agreed that her mother would adopt her 2 sons. She seemed to be doing well because she was drug-free for 4 years after leaving the treatment facility and spent that time raising her daughter. At some point, she would later relapse after dating a number of men who happened to be abusive or drug dealers. During this time, she went broke trying to fund her drug addiction and had to prostitute herself to feed this desire. Brown was also known to write worthless checks, and it became so bad she was ordered to participate in a court-ordered treatment program. On the other hand, Brittany had to live with Willie Sr. and Melinda at some point. The couple still used drugs heavily, and, like a circle, little Brittany would be drawn into the world her mother had been involved in. She was reportedly involved with an older man who was also a drug dealer at the young age of 13 or 14. She would get drugs from this man and supply them to her grandparents. Her elder brother, Greg Jr. Miller, had even stated that he often visited Brittany, and she was just a 5-minute bike ride from where Lillian stayed. A tragic childhood. In his testimony, Greg Jr. Miller stated he noticed that Brittany wasn't always happy and only seemed to feel good whenever they biked together far away from where she lived with Willie Sr., his wife. He said she had often told him she didn't want to live with them and often recounted stories of how she had been treated and what she was made to do. Unfortunately, she would remain with them until Tina Brown eventually graduated from the treatment program in 2006 and got a job as an assistant manager in a catering company. She started dating a new man and seemed to be doing well for herself as she was promoted to manager at her job and spent more time with her children. This fairy tale would end when she discovered her boyfriend was cheating on her with her brother's girlfriend. She broke off the relationship and was emotionally traumatized, which led to her relapse. She quit her job of 4 years and went back to using drugs. However, she pulled herself together and moved to Pensacola, Florida in the summer of 2009, enrolled in online college classes, and got a job at Waffle House. She moved with her daughter, who had been living with her grandfather Willie Sr. and his wife Melinda. While in Pensacola, Tina Brown and her daughter stayed with Pamela Valley, family, who eventually asked them to move out because her mother was moving in. This was when Tina Brown and her daughter would move to the trailer park in Escambia County, a violent and drug-infested neighborhood. It was here she relapsed again and quit her job at the Waffle House and actively started taking drugs. She even had sex with Heather Lee's husband to obtain drugs. On the day of the attack on Zimmerman, Brown admitted that she had used several $100s worth of cocaine. In the end, during his testimony, J.C. Coleman said that Tina Brown had acted the way she did because of how she was brought up. He said, "When Tina is not caught up in that mess, she is a beautiful person. I feel Tina. Tina Brown was convicted of something that a crackhead did, and she was caught up in it because of the way she was raised up. The way I feel that my brother and his wife should have been the one on trial and not her. They created that." Psychological evaluation of Tina's lifestyle. Indeed, Tina Brown and her daughter had lived rough lives, but that was no excuse to have committed a crime as grievous as kidnapping, beating, and setting up the 19-year-old Adriana Zimmerman on fire. Dr. Elaine Bailey, a licensed psychologist who had interviewed Tina Brown along with her family members, concluded her diagnosis by saying Tina Brown was logical and rational. She stated that there is nothing found that indicated schizophrenia, bipolar, or mood disorders. From all accounts, it seemed Tina Brown had committed the crime under the influence of crack. According to Dr. Bailey, when she had spoken to Tina about the crime, she had shown remorse, saying, "Why did I do this? I'm not a violent person. I never fight. I don't fight. I get mad. I don't fight. I don't even fight." She even offered an apology to Zimmerman's family on August 22, 2012, saying, "I really want to speak to Adriana's family. They are not here today, and I want to tell them that their daughter died a horrific death, and I was one of the ones who participated in taking her life. She didn't deserve it at all. I think back on the good times that we had, where we'd be laughing and dancing or doing little crazy stuff, and I remember back, I look at those autopsy pictures, and they haunt me today. And I'm sorry that they weren't able to have an open casket wake. Her family couldn't see her laying down peacefully. No more troubles. They don't see that. They couldn't. They weren't there. I'm just sorry. I'm so sorry that I helped in this. I'm so sorry." Dr. John E. Bingham, a licensed mental health counselor for the state, reviewed Dr. Bailey's documents and carried out a mental status exam on Tina Brown on June 22, 2012. During his trial testimony, Dr. Bingham said he found no sign of psychosis during his mental status examination of Brown. He said that she sounded logical and coherent, and her memory was satisfactory despite some lapses. However, he stated that the older woman had carried out the crime in a fit of rage, and this rage was most likely an overreaction to the actions of the victim, fueled by hurt, anger, betrayal, and years of abuse. Adriana attempting to stun her daughter was perhaps the catalyst that unlocked Pandora's box. Tina Lasagna Brown's sentencing. On September 28, 2012, the trial court found Tina Brown, now 42, guilty of the first-degree murder of 19-year-old Adriana Zimmerman and sentenced her to death. Before her sentencing, she made one last statement, apologizing for her involvement in Adriana's murder. "I want them to have closure. I hope today they get it," Brown said. During her sentencing, Circuit Judge Gary Burgosh stated that the crime had been committed in a cold, calculated, and premeditated manner, and that it was cruel and heinously carried out. Tina Brown would contend the sentencing by stating that while she agreed that the crime was calculated and premeditated, she said that the murder was not cold because it had been done in a fit of rage because she wanted to get revenge after Zimmerman tried using a stun gun on her daughter. She further argued that Dr. Bingham and the trial court concluded that she had carried out the crime when she was under extreme duress and was high on crack cocaine, impairing her judgment. She dismissed the notion that she had committed the crime in a cold manner. Heather Lee, on the other hand, during her testimony against Tina Brown, had pleaded guilty and was convicted of second-degree murder and sentenced to 25 years in prison. On May 7, 2013, Brittany Miller, now 20, was tried as an adult and given a life sentence without parole. On May 22, 2014, the Florida Supreme Court rejected Brown's appeal of her sentencing and conviction. It unanimously upheld her death penalty sentence for the murder of Adriana Zimmerman, who was beaten up and burnt alive. In 2022, Tina Brown's defense team would argue that Brown's death sentence and conviction be withdrawn after discovering new evidence. Brown's attorney claimed that Corey Doyle, inmate who had claimed that Heather Lee was innocent after a conversation she had with Brown, had just revealed that she was coerced to do so. Corey Doyle's new claim. Corey Doyle claimed that she lied on the witness stand and testified against Tina Brown because Heather Lee threatened her. She claimed that Heather Lee had threatened her to paint a false story story in her favor to the jurors so that she could get a lighter sentence. Brown's attorney stated that Corey Doyle had signed an affidavit on December 12, 2021, saying that she had testified against Brown because Heather directed her to, or else. According to Doyle's sworn affidavit, the woman stated that she took Heather's words as a threat. "I took this as a threat that I could be either physically hurt or killed. I believed correctional officers and law enforcement could not protect me if I did not agree to Heather's demands." In the motion filed by Tina Brown's attorneys, they stated that Doyle's trial testimony was damaging to Miss Brown, not only because it alleged a sensational and spontaneous confession by Miss Brown, but because it bolstered the credibility of Miss Brown's co-defendant and the state's star witness, Heather Lee. Doyle claimed to be a completely uninterested party who stumbled upon information that absolved Lee of all culpability in the murder and implicated Miss Brown as the primary aggressor and direct cause of Zimmerman's death. Brown's attorney strongly argued that Doyle's testimony had skewed the court's judgment against Brown. The motion said, in light of the testimony's falsity and the significant prejudice it created against Miss Brown at multiple stages of her capital litigation, her sentence and conviction cannot stand. However, this motion would be squashed by the state prosecutors, who argued that the motion was not presented promptly, and this false testimony would have been discovered earlier with proper due diligence. They also stated that even if the evidence had been presented earlier, it still wouldn't have resulted in a lesser sentence for Brown. In a counter-motion, the state prosecutors stated, as the Florida Supreme Court detailed, the evidence at trial is overwhelming that Brown was involved in the murder, and none of the newly discovered evidence would do anything to disturb the evidence of felony murder. The victim miraculously survived long enough to identify all three women as her attackers. Additionally, the observations of witness M.A. at the trailer and other forensic evidence clearly show that Tina Brown was the instigator and primary aggressor. The tragic case of Adriana Zimmerman was and still remains one of the most chilling murder cases in recent history. While Tina Brown may have lived a life of repeated trauma and violence, it is never an excuse to end the teen mom's life in such a gruesome manner. If you got goosebumps watching this, you might be blown away when you watch the video on the next card. I'll be waiting for you there.